Hello, everyone, and today it is time for me to talk about Big Brother 23, and we're now in this new era that I like to call the postmodern era. Obviously, this era is the start of the diversity quota that has been officiated all throughout CBS at late 2020 and has been on every reality show since. And I feel like this is something that's kind of been done on other reality shows that aren't on CBS, but it's not as officiated. So the season continued, week one actually being week one, and the live move ins. Obviously, the diversity quota means that there are half of the casts that are white and half of the casts that are non white. But I've mentioned in other videos how this is kind of problematic because some of these quote unquote POC groups are also legally considered white, or if you're like half Latino and half white, you're considered a person of color, and it's just very complicated, and it's a very deep hole that I can really lose myself into. Obviously, this plays a part into this season because obviously there's the Cookout Alliance that has 6 people of African ancestry, which is the most that has ever been on a Big Brother season. And because of this huge numbers advantage and how much Black Lives Matter popped up on the last season, which was All Stars 2, and just in general what happened in the world during 2020, obviously it came in with a huge mind frame or thought in the house guests' minds. And obviously, they dominated the game, and I'm really proud that this happened since it's very rare to actually see a group of black people do well in Big Brother for a myriad of reasons that I've discussed several times throughout many different videos. So to see them get together was very good. What I didn't like is that there's a lot of identity politics within this, as they all kept on discussing who is the quote unquote good representation for the season, or as the quote unquote good representative of black people. And this ended up tying into some misogynistic elements in the black community. And they also threw in a lot of tropes where people who were more outspoken and unfiltered were seen as quote unquote ghetto, while others who could quote unquote assimilate more with white people were seen as the better representation. So all that kind of played into how the season turned out, which I didn't really like. And in addition to that, it kind of did suck at the same time where the people in the alliance weren't playing for themselves. They were playing for an idea and a group of people that really only benefited one person in the alliance. And it said that other people couldn't really progress in the game due to their racial makeup, even if it was in the people in the cookhouse best interest to keep them around. And there's just this huge roadblock where it was kind of like there's 2 different games happening, and one of them wasn't Big Brother, but the one that wasn't Big Brother was the more dominant one. So it's kind of just had this weird element to it. And even outside of all of that, I found the season pretty boring for the most part, as it was very similar to All Stars, where there's this dynamic that was officiated and set in place from the very first week, and it didn't change whatsoever until the very end. And there was very little drama happening in the season overall, so it's kind of just a slug to watch. From what I remember on the feeds, the cast had a lot more fun together, and they did a lot of activities together, which is cool because Big Brother 3 was kind of the same way, and it's one of my favorite seasons, and that season didn't have a whole lot of drama. But the difference between this season and that season is that there really wasn't much going on in Big Brother 23. At the same time, I do think the cast kind of saves it from being the worst of the worst, though I don't think the cast is as good as many people think of the cast. So overall, my thoughts on Big Brother 23 is that it's definitely not one of the stronger seasons, but I don't know if it's one of the weakest. But maybe me going through all the weeks will have me have a more solidified opinion in that regard. So week one is seen as the best week of the season, and I definitely see why, since Frenchie's HOH is a complete, utter disaster. But when I was rewatching this season, I honestly didn't get a lot of the craziness that I remember that actually happened on the feeds. So it wasn't even as entertaining as I remembered, just based off the episodes. So Travis is a startup sales consultant who is perceived as the dumb surfer in his life, and he is smarter than he appears. Derek F. is a global safety assistant who is the son of Smokey Frazier, the boxer. Frenchie is a husband and father who is a farmer who was in the military and is a superfan. Xavier is an attorney who played college basketball, but his ACL injury halted his athletic career. Frenchie wins the first competition, making him eligible for HOH. And we have the tedious live HOH competition that also took place last season and will happen in the next 2 seasons after this, so it's really just not a fun watch. Asa works in tech and is a first generation Cameroonian American, talks about her grandfather being the parliament to the king and having over 300 cousins, and she is a pastor's kid. Brittany is a future teacher, just graduated, and is a 4 times black belt, and she also has autism. Alyssa is a swimwear brand owner, and people assume that she's just a pretty face, talks about having to be independent from a little age. Whitney owns a makeup company and talks about her being a single mother. I actually do remember reading a post of hers that talked about her journey with her ex-husband and how he was very abusive and how she broke out of that marriage. So I do respect her in that regard. I just wish they showed more of it on the show. Anyways, Whitney wins the first competition, making her eligible for HOH. Kylan is an account executive and talks about volunteering with non-profits, talks about being multiracial, so he's not easily defined. He didn't know that he had autism while the season was filming, and that's something he'll find out shortly afterwards, though he mentions it all the time on the challenge. Christian is a general contractor assistant. I'm pretty sure he's an actual actor, but they just don't like listing that on their BB House guests, just from what we've seen in the past, this season, and even in the future, so I think his career was false. And he still lives with his parents. Derek X is a startup founder who talks about being the only Asian guy wherever he goes and is extremely competitive. Brent is a flight attendant who likes to travel, flirt with the ladies, and is extremely competitive. Christian wins the competition, making him eligible to be HOH. Sarah Beth is a fluorescent chemist who is an anime cosplayer and is also a seamstress. Hannah is a graduate master's student who really likes school as she graduated high school and college very early, and she talks about being biracial, which would be called a dougla as she's half Indian and half African. Claire is an AI engineer, and people underestimate her in the field because she is a woman and is a huge superfan. She also mentions being bisexual and how she will use it to her advantage in the game. Tiffany is a CEO of a lobotomy motobiology service. Hopefully I said that correctly. I don't know if I did. And is a single mother and a superfan and is athletic for a 40-year-old. Claire wins the competition, making her eligible for HOH. The 4 people that won were able to choose their teams, which is a twist for the first few weeks of the season, and we've seen how this worked on several seasons up to this point. The teams are formed with Derek F., Brittany, Ozza, and Frenchie being the Jokers, Derek X, Hannah, Brent, and Whitney being the Aces, Sarah Beth, Xavier, Alyssa, and Christian being the Kings, and Travis, Tiffany, Kyland, and Claire being the Queens. The Jokers win, which means that Frenchie is the HOH. Travis feels insecure about being the last pick, which is a sign that he didn't make a good first impression, and Sarah Beth is lying about her job, claiming that she is a voice actress. Xavier is crushing on a bunch of women, but is obsessed with Alyssa, which will last throughout the entire season and even after the season, but it would end after she turned on him in the Challenge USA 1. And Frenchie tells the diary room that he doesn't like meatheads, specifically mentioning Xavier, Christian, Travis, and Brent, but Brent and Christian are his targets, since he already promised the other two safety. Remember that for later. Derek F. immediately bonds with Frenchie, and they pretty much agree to protect one another until the end. Frenchie tells some of the women that he will not nominate a woman this week, and he is a showman's killer, but he's promising everyone safety because he intends to keep it, but he wants to be safe next week. Brent speaks to Frenchie, and he talks about how his father's death by the S word that you can't say on YouTube caused Frenchie to open up and bond with him, as he was intending on targeting Brent, and he doesn't like judging others based on their appearances, and Brent doesn't like being judged by his appearance. Frenchie was planning on targeting Christian, but he ends up winning safety, so Frenchie's plan is thwarted. Everyone is talking about how paranoid Frenchie is, and he is creeping people out with how he is walking around the house. Frenchie is getting worried that Christian and Alyssa are showmancing. They weren't even a showmance like that at this point. So he asks Alyssa about being in an alliance, and she says that she's with her team, and she is not in an alliance. Frenchie nominates Alyssa and Kylan for eviction. Most of the House is shocked by the nominations, and based on the speech, Alyssa grasps that she is nominated because of her supposed relationship with Christian. Kylan is crying based on being nominated and is kind of shut down. And it's interesting that I'm watching this while he's currently being consistently targeted on the Challenge 39, and he kind of reacted the same way there that he is on this Big Brother season, where Asa and Derek F., who didn't know Frenchie's nominations, are comforting Kylan. Frenchie tells Alyssa and Christian that they are in alliance and a showmance and it needs to be split up, but she thinks it's ridiculous since it's only day 3. Frenchie now feels bad and wants to find a new target. Sarah Beth talks about being bisexual and how her parents are uncomfortable with it as they are very religious, where it might be easier if she dated guys, but she's with a woman at the moment. I remember there are a lot of nasty comments about her bisexuality, especially from Tiffany, who got really jealous over Sarah Beth's relationship with Colin, even though there's nothing romantic there, and Tiffany suggested that Sarah Beth was faking being in a relationship with a woman. So Frenchie now wants to target Derek X since he overheard him and many others, though I think Asa and Derek F were in this conversation as well, mainly, having a conversation about Frenchie, and Frenchie pretty much threatened Derek in his own way. Frenchie tells Brent to not be around Derek X for the rest of the week, which Brent thinks is unreasonable since they are teammates. Brent pretty much warns Derek X that he could be backdoor. Derek F speaks to Tiffany and Asa about how everyone has a reason to be here and how the last year has been tough due to the Black Lives Matter movement, so they agree to work together, but they have to do it silently. Xavier joins the conversation and mentions that they need to pair up with one another or other people to control the season, and they call it the cookout, which is a term heavily used in the black community. Kylan is approached to be in the alliance, and he accepts it. Hannah was not included in it for a while, from what I remember, and from what they showed on the episodes. Brent and Frenchie make a final 2, and the former pushes for Travis to go home. Derek X wins the veto, and he plans to use it on Kylan, based on the conversations he had. Apparently, Travis planned to do the same thing if he won the veto from what he said. Frenchie realizes that his HOH is screwed and how he has to break his word to Travis since there's no one else. I remember there's a scenario where Frenchie, Brent, Christian, maybe not Christian, and Travis were all in the HOH room and they're all kind of just like badgering and threatening Kylan. And then when Xavier tried to calm the situation down, Frenchie kind of threw out some microaggressions against Xavier. So there's this weird thing with Frenchie where he claims that he didn't want to be with the meatheads, so he gravitated towards most of them throughout the week, and he kind of lashed out at people of a certain complexion. But I just think he got in over his head. But it also shows how some of the liberal white people have their own biases at times as well. Anyways, on the actual episode, Frenchie pretty much threatens Derek to use the veto, where if he doesn't use it to send Travis home, people will send him home next week. And if I remember correctly, I'm sure Derek's mind was already made up about how this was going to be something that he was going to do. Derek X uses the veto on Kylan, and Frenchie names Travis the replacement nominee. Everyone knows that Travis is the gunner, and Alyssa's teammates assure her that she is safe. Frenchie speaks to Whitney and Xavier, where he wants to align with them and get a few other people to form an alliance called the Slaughterhouse. He pulls Kylan, Christian, Derek is also in the room, though they don't focus on him, and this is Derek F, I believe. Brent and Alyssa are also approached to be in the alliance. Everyone that he approached meets up in the room to form the Slaughterhouse, though a lot of people don't really feel comfortable with this alliance, even Frenchie himself. Frenchie speaks with Asa, Hannah, and Tiffany, and Claire about wanting to work with the girls' alliance called the French Kisses, though people feel off about this since a guy is not supposed to be in a girl's alliance, and people don't feel good about this either. I don't really recall Travis campaigning much at all during the week, But the show makes it seem like him giving Kyland a strip/lap dance during his birthday was a way of campaigning, and it's clear that they just had no content from Travis overall, so this is the one thing that they had. We do see Travis speaking to his team, and they give him tips on how to speak to Frenchie. I don't know why they're telling him to speak to Frenchie, who doesn't even have a vote and is disliked in the house at this point. Travis speaks to Frenchie and Brent about how he will always be a target if he stays, and it doesn't amount to much anyways. Travis is evicted in an 11 to 2 vote. So I found Travis to be a complete dud and a complete poor on the season. He didn't really care much about the game whatsoever. I remember he spent most of his time just speaking to Derek X. He wasn't involved in the strategy, and he didn't even have much of a personality either, so he was kind of just taking up space. And him going home first was fine for me because he wasn't contributing anything to the season, and he really didn't want to be there. So, yeah. I do think he was kind of screwed over in a certain extent due to him being like the fourth target, kind of, because Christian ended up winning safety due to the twist. He already promised Xavier that he wouldn't touch him. Brent convinced him kind of to work with him, and then Derek X ended up winning the veto, so things kind of just fell on Travis. But even if he didn't go home this week, I don't think he would have lasted long in the game whatsoever. So he's kind of just here and a dud. So week 2 is another week that people claim is pretty good, with it being one of the only 2 good weeks, but I honestly disagree since I found this week to be very predictable and very boring, as the obvious result of Frenchie going home and wallowing in self-pity throughout the entire week happened, and I just wasn't into it at all. Kylan wins HOH, and we have the annoying speculating about who were the 2 votes, and I don't give a shit. Anyways, we learn that Frenchie asked Tiffany to throw a hanky vote to set up Derek X, and she did it under the guise that he will never tell anyone about it. Frenchie is about to blab about the rogue votes to Brent and Whitney, but Tiffany walks in the room to shut it down. Tiffany tells Kylan to beware of Frenchie since he is too untrustworthy, and Travis told Kylan the same thing before he left. We see Tiffany pretending to cry to Asa, so people won't expect them to talk game to one another, and Tiffany tells Asa that she wants Frenchie gone this week. Frenchie speaks to Kylan to make sure that he is safe, but the conversation doesn't go anywhere, as he's just referring to the I'm a big target argument. And Kylan isn't giving him much of a reaction, which is a reaction in itself. Frenchie leaves the room and storms around saying F Slaughterhouse and telling Whitney that he is out. Brent, Whitney, and Hannah talk about Frenchie being bizarre, and Whitney speaks to Frenchie wondering what the hell is going on. And he isn't even listening to what she is saying. He then speaks to Brent, ranting about how he is going home and how there was some discussion of Brent throwing the wild card to Frenchie, but he refuses to do so now. Sarah Beth wins the wild card competition and is safe for the week. Kellen speaks to Tiffany, where she is leading him to target Frenchie, but she does mention that Frenchie, Brent, and Whitney are the 3-headed monster that needs to be handled, though we see them all throw one another under the bus consistently. A bunch of other people throw Frenchie under the bus to him, and Kellen feels like Brittany is holding back information, claiming that she is the most loyal to her team. We see a bit of the infamous HO8 conversations that Kellen will have throughout the season, though a lot of it's just on the feed and not on the episodes, where he sketches people out and demands everyone to give him answers, but he refuses to give anyone anything to make them want to open up to him, and it shows a hole in his social and even some of his strategic game. Kylan nominates Frenchie and Brittany for eviction. Brittany does not handle being on the block well at all, as she breaks down crying, since she never did anything, and of course Derek F and Asa are annoyed with this. Pretty much everyone turned on Frenchie, who does speak to Kylan to assure Brittany that she is safe, and how he will use the veto on Brittany over himself if he wins it. Brittany and Kylan do speak next, and it's just as awkward as the last one. We have a scene of a potential showman with Brent and Hannah, though he was borderline making her very uncomfortable on the feeds, and she makes fun of his Italian accent. And Frenchie rants to Derek F about the Jocks always getting together, though he enabled them for a lot of his HOH week, which I already discussed. Frenchie tells Asa and Derek X about the slaughterhouse, where people in that alliance already predicted that he was going to out the alliance ahead of time. He tells Tiffany, Claire, Brittany, and Derek F., though Claire and Tiffany realize that he created the alliance, though of course Frenchie doesn't mention that. He tells Sarah Beth this as well, and Claire and Tiffany tell Kylan about the alliance. Derek X, of course, wins the veto, and Frenchie wants to give up, but his teammates tell him to get it together. Derek X, of course, does not use the veto. We are forced to see and hear Brittany rapping around the house, and they're trying to make it seem like this is an attempt for her campaigning, though I really just don't think they had much content of her. But we do see some of Frenchie's campaigning, where he mentions a bunch of people that or he mentions to a bunch of people that he will be their shields and all that jazz, and it's just the same talking point over and over again that really goes nowhere. We see Kylan and Sarah Beth start to get close, and she talks about how it's been a year since her father died due to COVID. Kylan meets with the other teams to make an agreement where they would not target him since he has no more power and can't compete next week, and of course they tell him that he is fine. Derek X stays behind and notices that the other members of his team, mainly Brent and Whitney, didn't promise him safety. He meets up with the Kings, and they all agree to keep him safe next week, where we see the start of the Kings and Queens aligning with one another, where the Kings realize that Brent and Whitney are the next targets. Kylan tells Tiffany and Claire the plan, and they like the two teams and Derek X uniting together to form the Royal Flush. Brent wants to get rid of the girls since two guys are going, and he is telling this to Winnie and Christian. Frenchie is evicted in an 11-1 vote. Frenchie is definitely someone who brought a lot of needed chaos to the season, and though I found him to be very uncomfortable with how hypocritical he was and how he kind of let his biases for many different things affect his gameplay, and honestly, he wasn't even that fun of a villain after a while since he just consistently victimized himself. He didn't really argue with anyone or cause much drama in general, and he was just pretty much a super fan who thought he had it in the bag and paranoided himself out of the house. And people mentioned that he would have been more interesting had he stayed, and the season would have been more interesting, but honestly, I think he just would have dragged even more had he stayed, and he wouldn't have offered anything else. But Frenchie definitely has arguably the worst HOH week of the season, and gave the season some of its few memorable moments, so he has that going for him. Arguably one of the worst players ever, and he might be the worst. But we'll see when I eventually rank everyone in the BB US cast. Week 3 was an utter bore. They spent so much time setting up this huge blindside where, one, I don't even think it ended up being a blindside, and two, if it was a blindside, there's literally no payoff, so it's all just kind of a waste of time. Xavier wins HOH, and Brent still thinks that the slaughterhouse is still a thing, and exists. Brittany is hoping that she won't be nominated, and Asa is also worried about it. Brent talks about how guys and girls can't be friends, since a man will always make a move at the most opportune time, and it leads to a huge montage of everyone being annoyed with Brent, and shows his poor social game rubbing people the wrong way. Xavier is aligned with most of the house, so his only option is to target Brent, Whitney, and Brittany, despite him liking the former two, and Tiffany is pushing for Brent to go. We have a segment of Hannah and Derek X, where she likes him and some other house guests are trying to push it, but she's not his type. He stated on the feed that he likes blonde white women, and we move on to Christian and Xavier becoming more of a showmance. Sorry, that was kind of a joke. Christian and Alyssa becoming more of a showmance, and Xavier also likes Alyssa, making it an awkward threesome. We do learn that Derek X and Hannah through the HOH comp, as Brent is the target, and Derek X is also planning on throwing the wildcard competition, so Brent is eligible to be booted. Derek and Tiffany go after Brittany to make sure that she can be a pawn against Brent, and then he throws it to Tiffany so she can win the wild card for the week. Asa is annoyed that Brittany was targeted in the competition, as they were able to watch this one, and after speaking to Xavier, she does not understand why Whitney can't be nominated against Brent, where he tells her that it will ruin his game, since he does have a relationship with Whitney. So Asa suggests for her to be put up, and she won't care if she goes home, but she doesn't want Brittany to be nominated again. And this to me just shows how little Asa really cared about the game, despite her being a huge fan entering the season and wanting to play it like June. Xavier speaks to Brent about being a pawn, where the latter says that he can't be a pawn due to his physical appearance, and he is an easy person to be voted against. Xavier nominates Brittany and Brent for eviction. Brittany is bawling her eyes out and is of course annoyed when Xavier tries to play nice with her. The aces come up with a smokescreen for what they're going to say to Brent. Asa is complaining to Derek F about their team taking another hit, and he's trying to remind her that the cookout is the biggest priority. Brent tells Xavier that he isn't stupid and is risking him being a pawn, but Xavier isn't telling Brent what the latter knows, because he wants to keep things calm this week. Brent thinks that he has his team, the Queen and Alyssa, where he mentions that he should be in accountants due to the amount of people that he has, which obviously doesn't age well. Xavier is getting teary-eyed due to seeing Brittany cry, and Asa has to end up comforting him, but she doesn't understand why Tiffany and Derek X sabotaged Brittany in the competition, where Tiffany mentions that Brent is the target and is confused why this even matters, but she's holding information back because Asa is too emotional of a player. Tiffany saw Asa's approach as confrontational. It wasn't, but this could lead to some of the colors and talk that has been mentioned about the dynamic by the fans throughout the season. And Xavier is cooling the potential fire, since Tiffany didn't have a good relationship with Asa and Derek F for a lot of the season. We see Christian and Melissa start to make out, and Xavier catches them doing this on his bed. We do learn that Hannah is now a part of the cookout. They didn't show her being a part of the alliance in the episodes up to this point, and she talks to Xavier about the deeper aspect of their alliance. Christian wins the veto, and Brent wants the nominations to stay the same, since he knows that he has the votes to stay. Christian, of course, does not use the veto. Brent thinks that the Mafia Alliance, which is the numbers that he has been talking about all week, and everyone else in the alliance sees it as a false alliance. Brent is telling Derek X and Kylan that they all need to nominate Xavier and Christian to go home next week, and everyone is really hyping up this blindside, where it doesn't even end up being a blindside. Xavier talks about how he lied about his career since he is just a model and a bartender, but most of the house guests don't believe him, especially because he can't make a drink to save his life, and Derek F is heavily pushing that he is unaware. Whitney gives Brent advice on how to speak to people in the outside world since she likes him deep down, according to herself, but he blatantly ignores everything she says. The Aces talk about how they have to target the Kings next week to balance the teams, though Derek X can't take the shot. I guess he decided to just wait a week, I guess, and Alyssa and Christian tell Derek X that they want Whitney out, since she talked about making big moves, and Alyssa knows that will be one of the Kings. Tiffany and Claire talk about how a king needs to go, and while they are working with them, keeping a group of four and a duo in that four isn't a good idea, which they tell Derek X about. They come up with the plan to throw it to an ace, preferably Whitney or Hannah, so they can take the shot. The Kings talk about nominating Hannah with Whitney, and Sarah Beth is heavily pushing this, and Xavier covers how much he doesn't like this. Brent is evicted in a unanimous 11-0 vote. Brent was definitely arrogant in how he came off to people and how he talked to people, which kind of rubbed them the wrong way. And while he had the foresight to know that he wasn't the best pawn and there's a chance that he could go home, he kind of talked himself into believing that he was staying. And while he did convince Frenchie to not target him, I don't know if that's much of a sign of his abilities as a player since it's Frenchie. At the same time, it seemed like many of his issues were social, and he kind of just thought he knew more than he really did. When it comes to himself as a personality, I didn't really find him entertaining, since there are many people like him or who fit in his archetype who've done a lot more and are just more interesting, more confrontational, or just more witty. So, while I can't really say that he's a dud, I don't really think he adds much in general. But maybe in another season, he would have been more memorable, I guess, but Week 4 is another painfully boring and forgettable week where the results of the week were planned literally 3 days into the prior week. So Christian wins HOH, and the Queens are now back in the Royal Flush plan. Alyssa claims that she's the social game, and Christian is the competitions, which kind of is how the house perceives them, though as we'll see later on in the season, Alyssa doesn't have much of a social game. Derek F is annoyed that the Kings are in power once again, since the Jokers will be pawns once again, and Asa is worried since she doesn't talk game to Christian, or with Christian. Derek X is playing possible deniability to Hannah about who will be on the block, he knows it will be Hannah and Whitney, but doesn't know how hard he can fight for his teammates. Whitney is talking about how she has no idea who the obvious target is, which it is her. And there has always been an obvious target over the last 3 weeks. Christian doesn't know what to do and determine who should be the target, though Alyssa is stating that everyone wants Winnie out, so she should be kept as an obvious target, where Hannah won't have the target, where Sarah Beth agrees and mentions that Hannah is better socially and strategically, but Christian and Xavier don't like this idea. Strategically, Sarah Beth and Alyssa are completely correct on this. We have a scene of Derek F. shading Whitney's shirt where she has a workout top with some cleavage, and this conversation is even more awkward because Whitney would start an OnlyFans account shortly after her eviction, where people made a lot of commentary about it. Derek X talks about growing up Asian and how he was different from everyone and isn't close to his parents because they grew up in China and he grew up in the US. So there are different identities and a cultural value system. And it's an interesting conversation and it gives me some insight about Asian Americans that I just didn't know about. Claire wins the wildcard competition and chooses to get safety until jury, so for the next 2 weeks. Claire pushes for Whitney to go, and Christian agrees, since Whitney would nominate him, but Sarah Beth mentions that Hannah is better socially and has the men around her. She also mentions that she isn't close to her, where Tiffany pushes for Brittany to go home. Christian speaks to the Jokers and mentions that the Aces stabbed one another in the back to get out one of their own, and the Jokers mention that the Aces do not have any trust between them and aren't trustworthy at all. Derek F. throws Winnie under the bus, stating that she wanted them to target the Kings. This apparently changed Christian's mind about wanting to get Hannah out, and this goes with what Alyssa and Sarah Beth already wanted. Or I guess goes against it, my bad. Hannah speaks to Christian, where she is told that she is going to be a pawn against Winnie in so many or so little words. Christian nominates Whitney and Hannah for eviction. The Kings reunite again to talk about who needs to go home, and Sarah Beth still pushes for Hannah, but her teammates don't really agree, and Christian was convinced by whatever told him in their conversation about her not targeting him. Xavier speaks to Whitney and tries to cheer her up, since he is close to her. She did have a crush on him the entire season, and definitely tried to make a move on him, and he asks her if she threw one of the King's names under the bus, and she denies it. It's a lie, but she mentions in the diary room that everyone was targeting the Kings, which is true. Winnie speaks to Christian, and she stated that she knows that people are saying that she was targeting the Kings, but she never said that, though it's a lie. Asa is jealous of Whitney flirting with Xavier, though he isn't even interested in Whitney. And Asa has a crush on Xavier, and she tells him that she has a crush on him, but he isn't interesting. He clearly likes white women, which he will mention several times in the house. Derek X, of course, wants to save Whitney and Hannah, but Alyssa is telling them to not use the veto if Derek wins it, though he wants to veto Hannah if he wins it. Tiffany and Hannah are talking about how annoying Sarah Beth is, and Tiffany is talking about how smart Sarah Beth is and how she wants Hannah out of the house. They aren't really showing Tiffany's obsession with Sarah Beth and the real reason for it, and it has to do with Kyland. Christian wins the veto, and this is his third consecutive comp win, and of course he has no incentive to use the veto. So a group of them are talking about Slop next week, and Derek X mentions that himself and Hannah will be on Slop next week, and Whitney overhears it. So she mentions that he knows that she's going home, so now she's going to throw him under the bus to Christian, as Derek X is his biggest competition who takes him out, which will happen next week. And she says that she would work with them, and honestly, taking Winnie out doesn't benefit Alyssa or Christian at all. Christian does not use the veto. Sarah Beth realizes that she has to let go of the Hannah push, since it's clear that people are not catching on. Tiffany speaks to Hannah, who she made a final two with, and is the closest out of everyone in the cookout. And they talk about Sarah Beth, as Tiffany feels like Sarah Beth was looking at her during the pitch. And Sarah Beth joins them, though she thinks Sarah Beth is spying on her, which isn't the case. Kylan tells Sarah Beth that no one is talking about her, and we learn that they have a final two together, since he is the only person that she trusts in the house, though of course we know Kylan doesn't feel the same. And watching their relationship, especially on the feeds, was very cringeworthy after a while. Tiffany uses chess pieces to explain the strategy, where each of them pairs up with someone outside of the group where they look like a pair. So if they're nominated together, the other person will go. So Xavier and Christian, Tiffany and Claire, Arthur and Brittany, Hannah and Derek X, and Kyland and Sarah Beth. She explains this to the other allies to get them to the final six, and it's essentially the same plan that the brigade had in Big Brother 12. Christian and Xavier try to do Derek F's gay walk essentially, and it's a fun moment where a lot of stuff like this did happen in the house on the feet, but they don't show it here like they do in Big Brother 3. Tiffany says good morning 3 times to Kylan, Xavier, and Sarah Beth, and they don't enter, which pisses her off. Kylan speaks to her, and it's a very tense conversation since he didn't let it go, and she assumes that it's only because it's Sarah Beth, and it shows that Tiffany is just very jealous. Asa speaks to Tiffany about targeting a king, where she is also worried about Hannah, since she doesn't talk game to Hannah, but Tiffany bites her tongue. Winnie speaks to Alyssa, and the latter mentions that she doesn't want Winnie to go, and is told that Hannah will nominate her if she wins HOH. Alyssa tells Christian all of this, but none of it matters, as Whitney is evicted in a unanimous 10-0 vote. Whitney is arguably the most forgettable person in the season. It's definitely between herself and Travis. She was brought in the Slaughterhouse Alliance, but that alliance, honestly, I don't even think it lasted a week. And while she knew that it wasn't a strong or good alliance, she didn't really make much effort into making other relationships or allies with other people in the house. She definitely did plan on making big moves like targeting the kings, and I liked that she wanted to protect the women in the season, but the issue is she was kind of just very vocal about all this, and she didn't really have the social game to back it up. She definitely seemed a bit fiery, though we didn't get much of it on the season, so maybe in another season she could have been a lot more interesting and a lot more entertaining, but in a way she was kind of handicapped just due to how the elements and the dynamics of the season are, so I don't really know how to feel about her as a player, or at least not yet. Week 5 was one of the few somewhat interesting weeks of the season, and I really latched onto it at the time, and rewatching it definitely revamped some of that feeling that I had watching this week live on the feed, since it wasn't completely predictable and there's actually some sort of tension. But even still, comparing this week to the great or even the good weeks of many other seasons, and it still lacks. So Derek X wins HOH after refusing a deal from Alyssa. Claire, Sarah Beth, and Xavier throws the competition as well. Xavier and Alyssa were promised to not be nominated, and he's hoping that he can convince Derek X to save all of the kings. Derek wants to make a huge move, and it's now noticing that after Xavier fell, he tried to change the deal to make sure all the kings are protected, and Alyssa had the same mindset. Sarah Beth and Christian don't think he will put them up, since they are technically allies, though Sarah Beth knows that there is a chance that Hannah can influence things, since she's aware that Hannah was told about her campaigning to get her on the block and to be booted, despite them trying to make amends later on in last week. Derek X tells Tiffany and Claire about everything, and this annoys Tiffany, since she does not want Alyssa in jury, and he later tells Christian and Hannah that he wants to backdoor. Sorry, Derek X later tells Claire and Hannah that he wants to backdoor Christian. Tiffany also outs the royal flush to Hannah accidentally. Derek X has to explain to Hannah about what the royal flush is, and Tiffany is told by Hannah in another conversation that she told her about the royal flush. So it's kind of a funny moment there. We have a scene about Asa's resting bitch face, and Xavier speaks to Derek X after he tried to renegotiate the deal afterwards, but Xavier doesn't see why it's a big deal, since he's in an alliance with all of the kings, but mentions if Derek X would go after someone on the team, it should be Sarah Beth, but mentions Brittany would be an ideal person to boot as well. Derek X says that she would be upset about it. Derek X speaks to the other Derek, who tells him to go after the kings, and he asks him if he was to go on the block, but mentions nominating a girl would be smart. Derek X asks Asa and Brittany if they would be willing to be pawns, and of course neither one of them wants to be a pawn. Hannah speaks to Derek X about nominating Sarah Beth and backdooring Christian. Derek X nominates Sarah Beth and Brittany for eviction. Brittany cries about being nominated again, and the Kings are all confused as to why Sarah Beth is nominated. And they all mention that they will take her off the block. Derek X tells Sarah Beth that she's a pawn and he can't put up another joker, so he's backdooring Christian. He lies to the Kings about Brittany being the target. Sarah Beth lies to her former teammates since she's for herself, but none of it really matters since Brittany ends up winning the veto. Sarah Beth takes the $5,000, which comes off as shady to some of the others in the house, but none of that really matters. Derek X decides to tell Alyssa that Christian is going up, and she's pissed off since he mentions that this will be the only shot to get at Christian, and she reassures him that Christian is not coming after him, and he could have done it last week, meaning Christian could have sent Derek home last week. If that was the case, Alyssa tells Christian that he's going up, and he's really pissed off because he's getting backdoored, and while this is happening, Derek tells Xavier that Christian is going up. Sarah Beth joins all of the Kings, and while they're trying to rationalize it, Sarah Beth says nothing in front of them, but on her own, she tells Derek X to take the shot, and of course she's going to say that since she's on the block. Right as the veto meeting is about to happen, Christian begs Derek X to not nominate him since he'll go after Christian is gone, and the shield and threat argument is used, and it pretty much is all for naught, and it pretty much ends up happening anyways. Brittany takes herself off the block, and Christian is named the replacement nominee. Christian knows that he has 2 votes in Alyssa and Xavier, so he has to get 3 more votes, and Sarah Beth knows that she doesn't have to campaign because of who Christian is. For some reason, Christian thinks he's on the block due to what Sarah Beth told Derek X, and he starts his campaign. Christian campaigns to Tiffany, who talks about Sarah Beth being really calm today, and he mentions that Tiffany's hug was like a goodbye hug, which is definitely true. And he tells her that she and Claire are the majority in the house, mentioning that he will fight for her. She knows that he needs 3 votes, and it's not just her vote, so she is annoyed that people are lying to him. I forgot to mention that he has the same name as her son, and Tiffany would always braid and take care of his hair, so they did have a relationship throughout the season. So this, as well as her annoyance of Sarah Beth, is influencing how she acts this week. Tiffany tells Asa and Brittany that they need to be honest about their votes, since Christian thinks that she is the swing vote, when it's really Brittany. Derek F and Asa are annoyed with how Tiffany is handling the situation, and he rants to Asa about not wanting to work with Tiffany, since she's trying to run everything and is trying to tell people what to do. Christian and Tiffany speak, and she tells him that he needs 3 votes instead of 1, and the Jokers are not voting for him to stay, despite them lying to him, and she tells him that if she was to swing, she would vote for him to stay. He isn't listening to what she is saying, but mentions that he can go after Derek X, but she does want him to stay over Sarah Beth. And the thing with Tiffany is, I believe on the feeds, she did plant the seeds for Derek X to go after Christian, and if she really wanted both of them to stay, she should have encouraged them to make up and have a good relationship. So it seems like she realized the error of her way, and she's trying to overcorrect it by campaigning very hard for Christian to stay. Tiffany mentions to Xavier that they both want Christian to stay, and Sarah Beth needs to go home. One of the main reasons for this is that Tiffany did not like Kylan's relationship with Sarah Beth, and this is because Tiffany subtly or not so subtly had a crush on Kylan and thought that he liked Sarah Beth, so though nothing was happening between Sarah Beth and Kylan. Tiffany speaks to Claire about keeping Christian since people will still go after him, and Claire mentions that she doesn't trust Kylan or Sarah Beth. Tiffany tells Christian to go upstairs to speak to Brittany, and he gets Brittany, but Asa and Derek F decide to go upstairs since they know that Tiffany's up to something and they want to cockblock it. Tiffany tells him or them that she just wants to talk to Brittany and Christian on her own, and if they won't leave, they won't have the conversation, and there's a bit of a back and forth. Tiffany rants to Hannah and Xavier about the situation, and they are annoyed that there's so much dissension in the house, and specifically their alliance. Christian is evicted in a 7-2 vote. Christian on the show came off like a puppy, and it's not just due to his fluffy hair. There's definitely a sense of naive and a huge energetic energy that he had in the house, but at the same time, he didn't really know a whole lot about the game, and while he did have a very good social game, he was too focused on competitions and didn't know when to throw competitions or when to not win competitions, which just built a huge target on him. And strategically, I don't really know how I feel about him, since while he wasn't really bad, he wasn't really good either. But at the same time, you can definitely tell that he is there to build his acting career, and he himself wasn't really the most interesting person at all. So I don't really think he was the most entertaining, though I can't really say he is a dud either. He definitely cursed a lot and kind of ranted a lot about some of the women and called a bunch of people bitches and stuff like that. But he never really had a confrontational personality in general. But I definitely do think he has potential as a player and is probably one of the better P jurors in general. Week 6 is a pretty unnotable week, but it's probably one of the better weeks of the season because it isn't as excruciatingly boring as most of the other weeks of the season. So Kylan wins HOH, though he was supposed to throw it to Asa, which causes some dissension, since Sarah Beth was supposed to be the next target. Tiffany wants Kylan to throw it, but she gets the question wrong, and it annoys her even more because Sarah Beth isn't going this week. Asa is breaking down because Kylan chose her 4 times in the competition, and she knows that Brittany is going this week, and Xavier is playing mediator. Tiffany is complaining about how Claire might go this week, and all of the members are struggling because they're closer to people that aren't in the six, and they don't want the others to feel like those connections were fake. Asa and Kyland speak in the H room, and it's very awkward because she wants an explanation for why he chose her, and she is annoyed that it comes off like he is interviewing her, and is annoyed that he didn't throw it. Claire is catching up with Kylan since they haven't spoken game in 2 weeks, and she kisses up to him, mentioning that the Jokers and Xavier could be targets this week, which is not endearing her in Kylan's eyes, obviously due to the cookout, but she's obviously not going to know that. He speaks to Derek F., and after trying to throw Alyssa under the bus, it ends up with Derek F. offering himself up as a pawn. Kylan nominates Claire and Derek F. for eviction. Claire is shocked with this, and Derek F. is keeping his mouth shut to the other Jokers, since they are also confused with the nominations, while Tiffany is saddened that Claire could go this week. The High Rollers twist is introduced here, where you can win a power, and it can only be used in the week that it is won or introduced on. Sarah, Beth, Kylan, Tiffany, Derek F., and Claire all play, but who wins will affect the veto competition in getting a second veto. There is a deal made with Brittany and Kylan where she offers to not target him if he doesn't nominate her for the next 2 weeks, and Derek F. continues to act like he is a pawn, and I don't get the purpose of this. Kylan tells Tiffany that Claire is targeting cookout members, and she realizes where Claire fucked up, so she has to clean up Claire's mess, and Tiffany mentions that she can direct Claire, but Brittany is causing Asa and Derek F. to focus on her, and not the group, as she is too chaotic. Alyssa wins the veto, and because Kylan bet on her, he gets a second veto and wants to flush her on his HOH, where he intentionally throws the veto to Alyssa, and honestly it's all just a convoluted power trip, in my opinion, but that's Kylan for you. Sarah Beth speaks to Kylan about how Brittany needs to go, since she targeted them first in the HH comp, and she didn't even bother clearing the air with her. Kylan speaks to Derek F. about Brittany going up, and he does not handle it well. Kylan tells Sarah Beth to tell Brittany that she is going up right before the meeting, and Sarah Beth does this in hopes to get a jury vote. Brittany is really pissed off and storms around the house to look for him, and of course he does not handle the conversation well at all. Derek F. fails to get Derek X as the replacement nominee, as Alyssa doesn't use her veto, but Kylan uses his veto on Claire and then nominates Brittany. Brittany, of course, cries and doesn't handle it well, since she feels like she's been picked on the entire season, and Kylan's plan to draw in Claire closer doesn't even really work, since she doesn't appreciate him dangling things in her face. Claire and Tiffany talk about how Derek F. is going to slide to the end, and they want Derek F. to go, though Tiffany is just entertaining Claire. Derek X has the same mentality as Claire, as Derek F is going to be a goat, and Brittany would take out Sarah Beth and Kylan, and Alyssa and Xavier. The future boyfriend and girlfriend continue their pitch to Hannah and Tiffany. Tiffany tells Xavier that Derek X and Claire need to go next, since they will figure out the cookout before anyone else, so Xavier now wants to win HOH, and she mentions Derek X, mentioning that all the white guys are gone pre-jury. And honestly, all this is just frustrating, since they're just stating the obvious. There are no white guys in jury, but it'll be made a huge deal during the next few weeks, and seeing Tiffany kind of just sabotage her game like this is just annoying, and she's starting to do here that she did with Christian, with throwing his name out there, but when the time comes, doesn't want to take the shot. Anyways, Xavier mentions all this to Colin, and they come up with a plan to get Derek X to feel comfortable about throwing the next HOH. Derek X realizes that he, Xavier, and Colin need to keep one another safe, since it will be easy for the others to get taken out. He should have thought of this before sending Christian home last week. He speaks to Claire about this, and she hints that it could be a backdoor situation. Brittany is evicted in a 7-1 vote. Honestly, I found Brittany to be very annoying. I found her to be very whiny, very entitled. I thought she was a very bad player, so she kind of just victimized herself the entire time, and she didn't really make a lot of the important relationships that she needed to. But at the same time, I do think she had kind of some notions, or preconceived notions thrown on her that she couldn't really overcome. But in general, I just found her with Asa and Derek to be pretty annoying. She didn't really contribute much to the season, and her rapping was just very, very, very irritating. Overall, I'm glad she went here, since she would have been a lot worse had she lasted longer and could have been a goat. But you could tell that she was well meaning in what she did in the season, and she definitely did have that fighting spirit that a lot of people unfortunately just didn't have in the season. Week 7 is another a notable dud week, and entering this week, I thought it would be interesting because someone who wasn't in the Cookout Alliance or in the Majority Alliance won HOH, and there's a chance that something interesting could have actually happened here. Sarah Beth wins HOH, and the Cookout are worried about her being in power, especially Hannah and especially Tiffany, who starts spiraling since she wanted Sarah Beth out over the last month, essentially. Kylan plans to pretty much manipulate Sarah Beth's HOH, and he tells her that he thinks Claire and Derek X should be nominated. Derek X is hoping that Kylan will vouch for him, but he and Alyssa feel lukewarm about Sarah Beth being HOH. Tiffany and Derek F end up getting into it, since she doesn't appreciate how he rolled up with her or on her with Asa and Brittany during the Christian situation, and I believe this happened last week, but they're showing it in this week. Since she didn't like how he didn't approach her to handle shit immediately, and they handle things differently. Derek mentions that her tone was very demeaning and intimidating, and Tiffany is mad that he is still defending it, but Derek doesn't buck up like he does during his shit talk sessions when someone's in his face. Sarah Beth is still not over Alyssa and Xavier campaigning for Christian to stay over her a bit over a week ago, so she wants to nominate the two of them, but Kyland is steering her in another direction. Sarah Beth and Alyssa talk about the power this week, and the latter agrees that she will play it, hoping to build some trust with Sarah Beth, since Alyssa only has Xavier in the house. Sarah Beth speaks to a bunch of people to get the power used this week, and Derek X doesn't use the power, which will seal his fate. Claire and Derek X are wondering about who Asa is working with, and they are wondering if Tiffany and Xavier are also working together, since she always deflects when his name is brought up. Sarah Beth mentions to Kylan that she wants to target someone that has a huge target out and to get the power used, but Alyssa, Xavier, and Derek X needs to go, so those are the three that are on her mind. But because of the twist, she needs to put up pawns to pull off a backdoor. Sarah Beth nominates Claire and Derek F for eviction. Alyssa ends up winning safety for the week due to the chopping block roulette, and decides to take Derek F off the block, where the roulette wheel nominates Xavier for eviction. Alyssa cries about accidentally causing Xavier to be nominated, and Claire realizes that Derek X is in danger if Xavier wins the veto, and Derek X kind of realizes that as well. And Tiffany is told this, since she does not want him to go. So it's a repeat of 2 weeks ago, and we saw her throw him and Claire under the bus last week, so she kind of set up a lot of the motion for this, but like I mentioned again, she did the same thing with Christian. Alyssa is told by Sarah Beth that Derek X is the target, which makes her happy due to wanting revenge for Christian. Derek X speaks to Sarah Beth to find out who the target is, but she gives him no information, where Hannah talks about this realization as well. The future boyfriend and girlfriend cry and freak out due to having the worst veto picks ever, and Xavier actually stops throwing competitions as he wins the veto. Claire has a complete meltdown, and Derek X and Tiffany have to console her. Tiffany speaks to Derek X about how if he pitches Hannah to go on the block to Sarah Beth, it means that he would stay since Claire is not as strong as he is. So Tiffany is fine with it, and she's throwing Claire under the bus for Derek X. But I do think Tiffany kind of has the tendency to kind of side with men in a lot of situations, just from the season and on social media since the season. Derek X speaks to Sarah Beth about this, but is to no avail since Xavier takes himself off the block and Derek X is named the replacement nominee. Tiffany pitches to Hannah and Asa that Derek X needs to stay, and Hannah reports this to Xavier, who is befuddled that the biggest threat is being handed to them on a silver platter, and Tiffany doesn't want to take the shot. Xavier convinces Asa to vote out Derek X, and Kylan and Xavier speak to Tiffany about it, but she gets annoyed, especially with Kylan and how he is approaching the conversation. But when he leaves, she speaks to Xavier and she seems more understanding. Tiffany only told them what they wanted to hear, since she tried to flip it for Christian, and she is going to flip it for Derek X. But it's stuff like this that put her at the bottom of her alliance, so she kind of brought it upon herself. Tiffany speaks to Asa about how she knows they all want her out first, though Asa claims that it is Asa, where she tries to make a final three with the woman, as the guys think they are untouchable. Xavier is isolated for a day, where he won't come out until Judy asks him to vote, and we see Derek X campaigning, as she tells him that he has to campaign, since people will think she's an influencer in the decision if she does it for him. She tells him that he needs Kyland and Asa to throw sympathy votes, and Hannah as well as herself can give him real votes, and he stays. Derek X speaks to Asa to get her votes, and they make it seem like she's interested in his pitch, though she really wasn't. Derek X is evicted in a 5-2 vote. I remember during the season, I felt like Derek X was extremely overrated, since people kind of just clung to him because of his conventional attractiveness, and because he was the main person in the house who had a presence that wasn't in the Cookout Alliance. But rewatching this season, I definitely found him more likable and definitely had the potential to really pick up on the game to the point of being a good player. But he never really got there yet, though I really like seeing people learn the game as they go, as I've mentioned throughout all of these videos. Though when he did have power, I don't think he handled it the best, as I still don't think targeting Christian was the best move, especially when he didn't have a lot of relationships that would cause him to be safe after making a move like that, and he didn't repair his relationship with the Kings. Overall, I definitely get why a lot of people like Derek, and while he isn't the most interesting player or character to me, he definitely had some sort of presence on the season. Week 8 is another painfully boring week, but I feel like a broken record saying that since I've said that for most of the weeks this season. So, yeah. Tiffany wins HOH, and of course Claire is really happy. Kylan is bawling his eyes out over Derek X being booted, and hopes that he will understand when the season is over. And I believe Derek X is the closest male to Kylan from the season, so he got what he wanted. And Sarah Beth really didn't like Derek X's speech, since he kind of just attacked her on it, though she is nervous about Tiffany being HOH. We learned that an alliance called the Monarchy was formed with Sarah Beth, Alyssa, Xavier, and Kyland. Everyone knows that the Queen of Destiny twist will come into place this week, and Kyland knows that he is going up against Sarah Beth, which he speaks to Tiffany about. Hannah cries about Derek X being evicted. Tiffany speaks to Derek about how he needs to play in the competition this week to keep the nominations the same, and he still does not trust her. Tiffany speaks to Sarah Beth, and she makes it clear that she is not happy about Derek X's eviction, and they have another conversation where Sarah Beth tries to get Tiffany to not target her, as she's throwing Alyssa under the bus. Tiffany nominates Khaled and Sarah Beth for eviction, and Xavier is the third nominee due to the twist of last week, where he took that punishment in the veto competition, where he had to be nominated this week, if he didn't win HOH. Tiffany tells Sarah Beth that Khaled is her target, but of course she is lying. Hannah speaks to Tiffany before the Queen of Destiny competition, where they need to have Claire win it, so she's not eligible to win HOH next week, and everyone in the cookout is in the HOH comp next week, where they speak to Claire about to get her to do what they want in this regard. Derek and Claire play in the competition, and Claire wins the Queen of Destiny, where she is the anonymous HOH, dethroning Tiffany. Kyland and Sarah Beth are nominated again. For some reason, Tiffany wants people to think that she won the secret HOH, though she already told the cookout about the move to get Claire to win the Queen of Destiny beforehand. Though Claire wants credit for this, so this could be her move, though she just repeated a move that Tiffany already did, so kind of contradicting herself there. Sarah Beth is not handling the nomination well, since she claims that they aren't likable, and Kyland is consoling her, but he obviously can't be honest about it, and she rants about if people are not playing strategically, then they need to send her home. Now, since it doesn't make sense to target someone everyone is already targeting. Honestly, it just felt really bad for Sarah Beth in this situation, and she didn't even know the full extent of it and how hopeless the situation really is. Claire knows that targeting Sarah Beth is not the best for her game, and Xavier should go, but she's just going to roll with what Tiffany wants. And Claire really should have worked on other relationships in the season, but she was at a brick wall nonetheless for obvious reasons. Hannah wins the veto. Sarah Beth was very close to winning this, and it would have made a much more interesting week, and she's thinking of taking Xavier off the block. Kylan speaks to Claire about how he wants the veto to be used on him, and Claire tells Tiffany this, which pisses Tiffany off, since he was the one who wanted to go on the block with Sarah Beth to begin with, and we see Tiffany ranting to the Feedsters, which she did a lot on the feed, but it's interesting that they included this clip on the actual episode. Kylan speaks to Hannah about getting the veto used on him, and she states that she is confused, and he is claiming that he wants to give Sarah Beth a sympathy vote. Hannah takes Xavier off the block, and because he was nominated due to the twist, there is now a replacement nominee. Alyssa mentions to Claire that she will be the only white woman in the house if Sarah Beth leaves, and Xavier is internally freaking out, as Christian was the last white guy in the house, and there's no white man in the jury, which people commented about. Xavier rants about it in the washroom, though she's just stating the obvious. We also see a house fire, which was something, I guess, but they really just didn't have any content for the episode. And Hannah falls off the hammock due to Herrick, and like I mentioned, they just didn't have content. We see a bunch of plotting about who will be the first to go in the SIGs, and we see the first time that they all gather together in a room, as they are all in the washroom, which is a nice enough moment. Derek mentions to the other guys that there are more women in the jury, so the three of them need to stick together, and Xavier mentions that he might go to the end with Tiffany and Hannah, since he has been more involved in the game than them, which so isn't true, especially Tiffany. There's actually a lot that Xavier didn't really know about pertaining the dynamics of the house that didn't involve the cookout, and he very well could have been a Christian in the season without the cookout. Tiffany tells Kyland that Derek needs to go first, since she and he, Kyland, are the biggest targets, and they make a final two together, though Kyland also has a final two with Xavier. But right now, he states that he has more loyalty to Tiffany, which doesn't last, though Tiffany is taking Hannah over him. Sarah Beth is evicted in a 5-1 vote. I actually enjoyed Sarah Beth a lot during this rewatch, as she really wanted to play the game. She was always thinking about herself, and she always wanted to make the best optimal move, and I really like someone who was very self-interested. Obviously, the issue is that there's the cookout, which she was obviously blind to, and she didn't really form many good relationships with people in the house, so she was only close to Karen, who was pretty much manipulating her, and their dynamic came off as awkward after a while. I really didn't get the hate that she got during the season, especially over her last 2 weeks, based off of just targeting Derek X, though she really owed him nothing, as he threw her on the block when he was HOH, and he didn't even put any effort into strengthening that relationship. But she definitely had a cutthroat side to her, and I liked how she was pretty much funny with how she acted and how she portrayed herself, especially in the diary room. So I appreciate her for wanting to make big moves and not really giving enough about anything else. Week 9 is somewhat interesting, but it's like a week 5 somewhat interesting week, where compared to most interesting weeks in Big Brother, it's really not that interesting. But you start to see the disintegration of the cookout, Tiffany's downfall. We had the memorable moment of her turning in Claire and them having that very emotional conversation, and all that jazz. So Tiffany wins HOH, where the plan was her to throw the HOH, pissing off all of her allies. I have to mention that it's so fucked up, pretty much, that Claire had to throw this competition, while Jeg, who was also the secret HOH 2 years and seasons later, was not given that same task. They all agreed to let Kylan win it so Claire could go home, but Tiffany played selfishly and didn't throw it like Hannah and Xavier did, since she wants Alyssa out this week. Tiffany is trying to create her own resume since there's only one winner and we get a lot of the house guests trashing her, where on the feeds there's a lot of misogynistic comments that came from the guys, which was just very unpleasant to watch. Alyssa clearly knows that she's going on the block since she is tired of the fakeness and having to do those stupid strategy talks, and she hates being on slop. Xavier is annoyed that he is going to be on the block for the third week in a row, and Claire is really happy that she is safe, at least for now, unbeknownst to her. Tiffany and Kylan have an awkward conversation in the HOH room about the HOH events. Actually, honestly, I don't remember if the conversation happened in the HOH room, but they talk about the HOH events, and Tiffany clearly doesn't give a fuck, as she celebrates Sarah Beth going home and getting Alyssa out this week, since Claire is not going on an HOH. Well, spoiled milk has aged better than that. Derek feels hopeless, and it brings up him being the fat guy who couldn't do anything when he was younger, and Asa has to cheer him up. Hannah really doesn't care, since she hopes that the others turn on one another, and Claire's thing isn't really bad for her. Tiffany tells Xavier that it was always 50-50 between Alyssa and Claire this week in her mind, and she tells Xavier that she has to put him on the block, since Alyssa will expect him to use the veto on her, and Xavier plans to do just that, since he wants to ruin Tiffany's game. The men continue ranting and complaining about Tiffany, and Tiffany sees them talking through the camera as she's joking about it with Hannah and Claire. Tiffany makes the girls alliance with Claire, Asa, and Hannah with herself, hoping that she will go after the guys, or they will go after the guys, especially Claire will go after them if she wins next week. The two of them talk about how Xavier has thrown every single competition, how the boys will stick together, and Xavier will win at the end, which is all pretty accurate. Tiffany pretty much tells Alyssa that she's going on the block with Xavier, and Alyssa breaks down the jury votes, and who Tiffany can win against, where all of her, meaning Alyssa's friends, were booted pre-jury, so Tiffany should keep her. And honestly, Alyssa is very convincing in this argument. Tiffany nominates Alyssa and Xavier for eviction. Xavier continues to complain about Tiffany, where he mentions that he might veto Alyssa off the block, despite him being on the block as well, where Tiffany will either have to put up Claire, where Claire will enter jury hating Tiffany, or she'll put up a cookout member, where Tiffany will completely ruin her game. So either way, she's screwed. Alyssa wins the veto, and Tiffany is stuck in a really tight dilemma, as she either has to nominate Claire, her best friend, or another cookout member, ensuring that the alliance doesn't make it to the final six. Xavier is more than thrilled with the results, but Derek does think there's a chance that he could go on the block next to Xavier. Tiffany tells Hannah that she has to nominate Claire, but she doesn't know how to tell about it, since she wants to give her some information but doesn't want to completely out the cookout. They come up with a narrative that she made a deal with the 5 other people of African descent, but when Hannah tells Derek and Xavier about it, they think that it's a dumb idea, since it could expose the alliance while Alyssa is still in the house. And honestly, Xavier is just really worried about having to deal with Alyssa's potential wrath. Tiffany has the conversation with Claire and tells her that she has to nominate her, since the other 5, due to optics, are people that she just can't nominate. And she came in with the goal of not nominating anyone that's similar to her in that way. And she tells Claire that she has no one else to nominate but her. Claire tells her that they are going to vote her out, and Tiffany says that she loves her to death, which is why she was torn yesterday and today, but she has to look herself in the mirror in the outside and to feel comfortable with what she sees. Claire asks Tiffany if she's in alliance with him, and Tiffany lies, saying no, and then tries to spin another narrative. Claire and Tiffany cry in one another's arms, and Claire does understand it, even though a lot of people don't get why she's so accepting of it. I wish she fought back a bit more, since it's her life in this game on the line and she kind of just took it. But overall, this is definitely a nice and memorable, but kind of tragic moment. Alyssa takes herself off the block, and Tiffany names Claire the replacement nominee. Asa, Derek, and Xavier talk about the scenario of Alyssa winning HOH, and the guys mention Tiffany, where Asa mentions Kylan as being the person who would go in that scenario. Alyssa is talking to the others about if Claire goes home, it will be all minorities, though she, as in Alyssa, is half white. I think even her Latina half is white, so I don't know. Anyways, the others are joking with or joking around her, but we learn that Hannah wants to give Claire a sympathy vote and wants to set up Kylan with the vote, so Alyssa will go after him if she wins HOH, which is an interesting idea. Claire is evicted in a 4-1 vote. Claire is someone that I would want to be friends with in real life, as she just seems to be a very cool person who would have great conversational topics to discuss. When it comes to her as a player, I don't really know how I feel. She kind of just did what Tiffany wanted, and while she had the right ideas and she knew what she needed to do, when she won power, she didn't end up making the move. And while she did have some other connections with people like Derek X, I do think that she's in general just very passive, and that's not the best skill to have. As a personality, she wasn't really that entertaining, but she definitely did have a likable quality to her that made you just want to root for her. I really do feel bad for what happened to her this week. I don't really know how I feel like she would do as a player, so that would be interesting to analyze in my next video. But she won the amazing race, so I guess she didn't really lose at the end, and she won with her guy. So, it is the double eviction, which, if I remember correctly, it was supposed to be a triple eviction from what was revealed about this week a few weeks earlier, but there were complaints online that the cookout wouldn't have had time to really celebrate making it to the final six, so they changed it to a double. Hannah wins HOH and nominates Xavier and Alyssa for eviction. Xavier wins the veto, and Hannah struggles with the replacement nominee since she made a final three with Kyland recently. Of course, Xavier takes himself off the block, and Kyland is named the replacement nominee. Kyland has a really bad conversation with Hannah, and even after speaking to Tiffany, he is annoyed that people are keeping appearances for Alyssa. Alyssa is evicted in a 3-1 vote. My opinion on Alyssa as a player honestly kind of decreased during this rewatch, since she mentioned that she was a very social player, and that was somewhat the case in the beginning, but when the jury portion of the season happened, she mainly just stuck with Xavier and didn't really try much else, and really kind of just isolated herself. So in that element, I do think that she weakened herself. And she had the right idea at some points, like not targeting Whitney, but at other points she was just way too passive and just did what others wanted her to do. But I did sense that there was a cutthroat nature to her, which we really didn't get to see here, but we obviously saw more of that on the challenge. As a personality, I wasn't really that entertained by her. She was kind of lukewarm, but she didn't really piss me off, so I didn't really find her unlikable. She's also someone that's kind of hard to analyze as a player, especially due to the dynamic of the season and her being handicapped due to the strong presence of the cookout, where she might have done better had this season played out like a normal Big Brother season, where the racial lines aren't such a huge emphasis in this element. Week 10 is boring. While it was nice to see the cookout have the house to themselves for the very first time, the people who played for 6th and 5th the entire season got 6th and 5th. I think there is a way to guarantee that there was a black winner, but to also play for yourselves and to also make the game dynamic, and that really didn't happen here. So when we finally have the week where it's just the alliance, the expected ended up happening because of everything that happened and how they made it such an undynamic house. So Tiffany makes amends with Kyland, or attempts to, since she did not want or expect for Hannah to nominate him in the double, and Kyland felt like they were trying to gain Alyssa's story vote. Tiffany attempts to make amends with Xavier over her HOH and sending Claire home, though Tiffany does intend on targeting Xavier if she wins the HOH, though she isn't telling him that, of course, but he wants her gone. Hannah also does speak to Kylan so she can make amends with him as well. Kylan and Xavier make a final two, as Kylan wants to go against the best to beat the best, and how Kylan kind of sees the best is kind of problematic in general, and Xavier knows that he will beat Kylan in a jury vote. Kylan wins HOH, and Tiffany as well as Hannah feel safe due to the final three deal. But Kylan plans to nominate them both, which he explains to Xavier. Tiffany tells Kylan that Xavier and Derek need to go first when he asks her about the final four, and Hannah of course gives him her pitch. Kylan nominates Hannah and Tiffany for eviction. Tiffany feels betrayed by the nomination, and she knows that she is the target, and Hannah is shocked as well. Hannah also is trying to get close to Asa since she knows that if Tiffany goes home, Hannah and Asa have no path to get to the end, and it's the same for the guys if a guy goes first. But the fact that they didn't really build that strong of a relationship with Asa throughout the entire season makes Asa's choice easy as to who she eventually sides with, and I do blame Tiffany and Hannah for that, especially as they focused mainly on their relationships outside of the cookout, especially Tiffany at this point, instead of the people that they were planning on going to the end with. It's pretty much the dilemma that Danielle was in last season. So Kylan won the veto, and of course he has no incentive to use it, but he's speaking to Xavier about how maybe using it on Hannah, since she has the best chance of winning the next HOH, and using Derek as a pawn, though Xavier wants the knobs to stay the same, since Derek is a number for them. Tiffany makes a pitch to Kylan and puts her ego aside to apologize to him, as she gives him her undying loyalty to him. Hannah makes her pitch as well, but it doesn't matter, since Kylan does not use the veto. Hannah and Tiffany talk about how they will tell their jury about the cookout, and then they bond about how they did a lot together and how their time in the game together is over. We do see Tiffany campaign to people like Asa, and we see Kylan talk about how he can use the money for his family, and Xavier talks about how his brother died a few months before the season started, and he was clearly already in the auditioning process when that happened, and that's why he is so focused as he mentioned his nephew, and this will be important next week. And Xavier wants to set up his nephew monetarily. On the feed, there's so much talk about who would be the quote unquote right representative to not only win the season, but to be the first black winner. And they used a lot of identity politics and a lot of the isms to justify their choice. And a lot of the reasons why people like Kylan and Xavier didn't want Tiffany to win the season and felt like she should go first was pretty much because they felt she was ghetto in so many words and she didn't have the right look to be that representation, and it adds another layer to the season and the cookout that makes me uncomfortable, since pretty much they felt like the people who could appeal to white people more or to be the token of black more deserved to win more, and that kind of adds a layer as to why Xavier eventually wins. So Tiffany is evicted in a unanimous 3-0 vote. Tiffany is the clear standout of Big Brother 23. It was really nice to see a woman who is older, and by I mean older for a Big Brother sense, since 40 isn't old in real life, and someone who is a single mother who was able to be herself, didn't feel like she had to be boxed in that mother card or be boxed into the older woman card, and seeing her really talk on the feet, especially about how she had to live her life in a certain way and she didn't really get to enjoy life for herself, and starting her 40s where she was starting to find her own fulfillment was really interesting to watch. And seeing her not only mastermind the season and to come up with all these plans and enjoy doing it was so refreshing, since it was very rare to see someone like Tiffany, who was very elegant and refined, but she was also very proud of being who she was and how she was kind of rough around the edges at times. At the same time, I do think she gave up her game for the cookout when she knew that going to the end with the cookout would cause her to not win, and I think there was a way where she could have played individually, but played to make sure there was a black winner as well, but she didn't find that balance, and ultimately, her 6th place finish was well deserved. At the same time, I didn't really like a lot of her commentary towards Sarah Beth, as it was very problematic and it came off as very pick-me-ish, since she was jealous over the supposed relationship Sarah Beth had with Kylan, though there was no relationship, and it seemed like to me that Tiffany had a crush on Kylan. And of course, there's the infamous Fingergate that is very debated online, and them sharing the same bed. So there are so many layers to it, and I think she let it derail her game completely. It is the second double, and Asa wins HOH, causing her to nominate Hannah and Xavier for eviction, as she's keeping her agreement to not nominate Kylan, and of course Derek is her final two, so she's not going to nominate him. Hannah is freaking out and asking Asa a bunch of questions, but is being lied to. But this was the exact same position Hannah put Alyssa through last week as she pointlessly lied to her. So it's interesting how things can just flip in a 7-day period. Kylan wins the veto and decides to take Xavier off the block, which pisses Asa off, so Asa has no choice but to nominate Derek. And this move shows that Kylan prioritizes Xavier over everyone else, and Derek doesn't appreciate being left out of certain plans. Hannah is frantically campaigning to everyone in a panicked manner, but it doesn't matter. Hannah is evicted in a unanimous 2-0 vote. As a player, I don't really know how I feel about Hannah. While she is very smart and was able to come up with certain plans, I don't know if she would have done it nearly as well if she wasn't in the cookouts and she wasn't involved in many of the other dynamics that were happening in the house. But she did have some bonds with people, which definitely helped her. But she definitely was under Tiffany's wing, and a lot of her power in the season was due to that. So I don't know how much she could have done if she was just on her own. At the same time, she played for a fifth place spot, and that's what she got. When it comes to her as a personality, honestly, I kind of found her to be pretty boring and bland, and also kind of cocky and arrogant as well, but it wasn't done in an entertaining way. Either way, she's a smart woman and clearly is going to accomplish a lot in her life. So it was also interesting seeing someone who was as young as she was not have her age consistently be defined for her, as we've seen in many young people in not only Big Brother, but in reality TV in general. Week 11 is kind of solid, and it really shouldn't be because Final Fours are usually very boring, and with this season, they made Final Four an entire week, which is kind of a thing that they do in this period in Big Brother, which really, really sucks. But seeing Kenneth actually get blindsided and seeing how it happened and the aftermath of it really makes up for it, since it has the only sense of really good drama in the season. Derek is annoyed that Kenneth used the veto on Xavier, showing that he is third on their list. Aza is pissed off at the two men for forcing her to nominate Derek, and he is pissed off with Xavier and Kenneth for the move that they did. Xavier wins HOH and is completely snowing Kyland, who thinks he's Xavier's final two, but Xavier plans to take Derek to the end. Derek and Kyland do not handle the HOH loss well and freak out in their own ways, and Kyland is paranoid, despite him trusting Xavier. Asa asks Xavier about his final two with Kyland, which he denies. Xavier nominates Kyland and Asa for eviction. Derek realizes that he might have to cut Asa this week, and she knows that there's a good chance that she goes this week. Derek denies his final three with the guys when Asa asks him about it, though he mentions that he has final twos with both of them from the beginning, though Asa puts it together that this is a final three, where she's kind of starting to regret how her HOH went. Derek speaks to Kyland about having to cut Asa this week, so he wants reassurance that their final two is valid, but Kyland is not giving him assurance. Kyland is trying to lie without outright lying, and Kyland has this thing where he wants people to give him all sorts of assurance, but he never gives them any assurance or answers, so it's just a thing that he does all season. Xavier and Asa talk about how Kyland wants to have a Batman vs. Superman dynamic at the end, and he kind of has this even on the current season of The Challenge, but how he views who deserves to be Batman and Superman compared to the others is kind of problematic as well, since he kind of thinks that men are better than women, and certain men who fit the certain aesthetic or is white appeasing, like Xavier, deserves to be one of the two slots, with Kyland being the other slot. But I kind of touched a bit upon that last week. Derek and Kyland have another tense/argumentative talk where Derek kills the final two at that moment, and Kyland leaves because he feels like Derek is ungrateful. We have a scene of Kyland smelling a bunch of things, and he mentioned that a fan saw him on the feed and gave him the tools to eventually get diagnosed with autism due to stuff like this after the season. By like a few months, actually, if I remember correctly. Derek does apologize to Asa, as after his tense conversations with Kyland and Xavier wanting Asa to stay, he wants to make amends with her, which gives Asa hope. Xavier ends up winning the final veto of the season, and of course he has no reason to actually use it. Kyland is not handling the loss well, and I think he was trying to ignore the bad feeling that he had, and he wants Xavier to use the veto on him, which pisses Kyland off when Xavier avoids the talk altogether. Kyland is speaking to Derek, where he mentions that it will hurt him to send home Asa, since he is closer to her than Kyland, and before him, meaning he had loyalties to Asa before he did to Kyland. Where Kyland mentions that this is Derek's first time having to make an actual choice this season, and Asa has done less. So this is the entitlement of Kyland coming through in this moment. Derek then mentions to Asa and Xavier how he is struggling to send home Kyland, and they're getting annoyed with it, since Kyland is trying to guilt him. Asa and Derek argue about how he feels like he has carried her throughout the game and she did nothing, and of course Asa doesn't take this well, and this is the start of their disintegrating relationship that will last throughout the entire final week. Xavier decides to not use the veto, and Derek votes to evict Kylan. Kylan knows that this is Xavier's move and not Derek's move, so he lashes out at Xavier and not Derek. He brings up Xavier not setting up a good enough example for his nephew, whose father, meaning Xavier's brother, just died a few months ago, and Xavier is livid, giving Kylan a warning to shut the F up and to keep his nephew out of his mouth. Asa and Derek have to separate them, and Julie is rushing to chant to Kylan that he needs to go. Kylan would also do something very similar on the challenge with Asaf, so it is a pattern with him, clearly, when he doesn't get his way. I think Kylan has a lot of the tools to be a great Big Brother player. He's very good at the competitions, he is strategic, and he does have the ability to make some social bonds, but there's so much that's just holding him back. Just his condescending attitude in general, his inability to see other people's perspectives, and kind of some of his socialization skills as a result of his autism now that we're looking back, definitely affected how he played the game, and why I don't know if he would have had an actual good chance to win if he was at the end. Despite that, Kylan definitely brought some character to the season, and he was a very unique person on Big Brother, and I'm not surprised that he's having a continued career in reality TV. But some of the way he views things were just kind of problematic, and he was a very frustrating person to watch at various points in the season, whether it is just on the television show or on the feeds. But he definitely did a lot of the heavy lifting of the cookout, and I definitely do give him props for giving us some of the only interesting moments in the entire season. I don't really know what to say about the finale week. It's a pretty standard and uninteresting and predictable finale week. So Xavier wins part 1 of the final HOH, and Asa wins part 2 of the final HOH. Asa and Derek have argued so much during the final week that Asa ends up changing her mind on wanting to take him to the final 2, and she now wants to take Xavier to the end. They argue several times since she doesn't like how he speaks to her, and he feels like he carried her throughout the season. Xavier wins the final HOH and votes to evict Asa. Asa to me comes off like an empath, where she feels so much for people. She feels sorry for people. She's very empathetic. She's very understanding, and she loves people so much. And she likes building these bonds and understanding and seeing the perspectives of so many people to the point where it takes a toll on her emotionally, where she feels things so much and she has to regroup a lot. And I definitely do think that while it caused people to not want to target her, I also think that it caused her to completely overlook a lot of the strategic elements of the game. As she volunteered herself to be a pawn several times, she came off as very emotional to the point where a lot of her allies couldn't rely on her, so on and so forth. As a player, I don't really think she would have thrived much without the cookout, but I definitely enjoyed her presence enough on the season, even though she wasn't the most entertaining or the most strategic or charismatic person. Kyland asks Xavier about the most important factors in determining the first black winner, and Xavier responds that the factors are that who played a great game, but also who didn't make things personal as they played the game, as he's claiming that he never got personal with anyone, but he did lie, deceive, and manipulate, but that's a part of Big Brother, and he's hoping that he didn't disrespect anyone. He also mentions individual and team gameplay as well. Brittany asks Derek F about the 2 key decisions he made on his own, and he responds that he made the cookout, and then he spoke to each HOH with the facts that would cause someone to be targeted outside of the cookout. I don't know why he didn't mention stopping the Christian flip, since that's arguably the thing that he could have used that made himself have some sort of agency, but I guess it just didn't come to his mind, or he didn't think much of it. Alyssa asks Xavier about his biggest mistake in the game, and he responds that he got too close to his king teammates, as seeing them walk out of the door crushed him, but it made things harder, pertaining what he had to do. Hannah asks Derek F if he was here for the fame over the game, and Derek mentions that while he was here to be on TV, take note that he has complained about not being on another TV show since the season over the last 2 years up to this point. He was here to make money for his mother, and he did play the game. Derek asks Xavier, he calls him Lucius, to list 2 strategic moves that he was not aware of, and Xavier responds, sorry, when I say he, I mean Derek, not being aware of, and Xavier responds about blindsided Kyland, and he didn't throw the H and he did throw the HOH in week 5 to benefit the Cookout Alliance, since he knew Derek would target the Kings, and everyone else was targeting them anyways. So he wanted to save his hide, pretty much. Sarah Beth asks Derek F what he contributed to the Alliance outside of starting fights to conceal it, and from just this question alone, it's clear that the other Cookout members told Sarah Beth that was his role. Anyways, Derek responds that he spoke to each HOH to be in their ears, and if something needed to be executed, he made sure it happened, though he never goes into detail as to what these were. Asa asks Derek F why he deserves the money over Xavier, and he responds that he put in the work and he gave in his all in the competitions, even if he failed, and he thought about everyone in the Alliance volunteering to be a pawn to protect his Alliance. Derek's final speech is about coming into the game to be the first black winner, and as soon as he saw 5 others like him, he started the Alliance, worked very hard, and never gave up. So he's a competitor despite not winning anything. He can't say anything bad about Xavier. Xavier's final speech is about balancing team interests, alliance interests, and individual interests, where he balanced that the best of his ability. Since he is also the only one who had 2 non-Cookout members in the jury, he never wavered from the Cookout through competitions and won competitions for the Cookout. He won the most competitions in the season and was nominated as a pawn 5 times, as he was the ultimate pawn and only received 1 eviction vote and the best competitor in the house. And he'll never say anything bad about Derek. Xavier wins the season in a unanimous 9-0 vote. Honestly, Derek F was kind of annoying throughout the season, as he is kind of delusional about the amount of influence that he did have throughout the season, and the few moves that he did make, he couldn't even bring that up in his final speech. I didn't like how he had a lot of misogyny towards the women in the house, towards people in his alliance and people not in his alliance, and he kind of just laid there and just complained a lot. At the same time, I definitely do see why he was casted, and I do appreciate how he redeemed himself and actually took accountability post-season, so I'll give him credit for actually growing as a person. He most definitely benefited from being in the Cookout Alliance, since I do think he would have been on the outs his entire stay had that alliance not been a thing, but he wasn't very threatening either. He definitely had his moments throughout the season where he caused the little drama that happened, but I don't know if it's really enjoyable. Overall, I don't think he's a good player, but he's not the worst of the worst, I guess. Xavier is an extremely predictable winner. I believe most people predicted him to win once they saw the cast preseason, and once the Cookout formed and a few weeks went by, it was clear that he was going to win. As a character, I didn't really find him to be very entertaining, since you could tell that he was holding back because he wanted to be perceived a certain way, especially with how he's spoken outside of the game. It was clear that he made sure that he was as humorous, and he wanted to be the best black person, or the best token black person ever. So he muted himself, and he was very selective with what he wanted to show of himself. As a gamer, I think he had some sense of strategy, and he just kind of kept that static gameplay that benefited him especially. But he definitely needed to be filled in on a lot that was happening in the house, especially pertaining the dynamics that didn't involve the Cookout directly, where I don't think he would have lasted as long if the Cookout didn't exist. But he's a fine enough winner. In conclusion, I am very conflicted on the season because as a black person, this should be one of my favorites, especially since the final 6 was filled with people of African or black descent, and they are the most successful alliance in Big Brother history. No one can take that from them. At the same time, I like seasons that are definitely more dynamic in their gameplay, with there being many power shifts, a lot of people taking their shots, and everyone just being a lot more self-interested, and that really wasn't the case here. And seeing the dynamics of the cookout definitely reminded me of some of the dynamics in the black community, with some people putting others down due to being perceived as ghetto or being perceived as not the quote-unquote good black person. And what the quote-unquote good black person means has so many layers to it that isn't as positive as the perception of it is. And at the same time, the cast isn't unlikable, and I think there are a decent amount of likable people here, I don't think the cast is as strong as many people claim it is. And I think due to that, even with the non-Cookout members, we had a season that had very little drama and not as much humor, especially on the episodes. At the same time, there were definitely some memorable moments that bring it up from the most boring and predictable seasons that I have very low on my list and that I have already covered. I don't think it'll be in the mid tier either, so I'll probably be in the lower middle tier once I finish it. But anyways, this was an interesting season to start the new era of Big Brother with the diversity mandate and some of the changes that they've made to the seasons as well, with shortening them. And I do think that that was a good move, since the last several seasons were just way too long and they just dragged out. So, what's going to happen now is I'm going to rank the BB23 cast based on the gameplay that they displayed in this season and how repeatable I think it is. And by it, I also mean by their skill sets as well. I am hoping to get down the modern era, meaning Big Brother 16 to Big Brother 22 casts or players tier ranking done sooner rather than later. Of course, I will cover Big Brother 24 and Big Brother 25 as soon as I can, and I will be making other videos. You can follow me on Twitter at lala_Annie. Thank you all for supporting everything I do, and I will be back with something soon. Bye.